The sun hadn't yet risen fully when we left Barstadvik, the early morning wrapped in a delicate silvery mist. The small village was still, as if holding its breath, and the only sound was the soft hum of the engine as we pulled away from the cottage we had rented for the weekend. My hand rested on the center console, inches away from his. The closeness between us felt charged, every moment crackling with unspoken tension. The cool air seeped through the barely cracked window, and I shivered, unsure if it was from the cold or the flutter in my chest.
Cold? He glanced over, his deep blue eyes catching the faint morning light, and before I could respond, he reached over and turned the heat up slightly. His fingers brushed mine, and the touch sent a ripple of warmth through me. "No, I'm okay," I lied, hiding the tremble in my voice. Outside, the mountains began to emerge from the mist, towering over the narrow road like silent sentinels, their peaks softened by the early light. The landscape was breathtaking, but my thoughts kept drifting back to him. We had been friends for so long, yet something had shifted recently. Every word, every glance between us seemed to hold a new weight, and I wondered if he felt it too. As we turned onto the E39, the road ahead felt like a promise, a journey we had both been waiting for, though perhaps not just to Ålesund.
As we drove along the edge of Fjorden, the landscape transformed into a world of serene beauty. The fjord's waters were like liquid glass, reflecting the towering mountains on either side with a clarity that took my breath away. The jagged peaks of the Sunnmore Alps, still capped with snow even in the summer, seemed to touch the sky. It felt like we were driving through a living painting, where every curve of the road revealed a new masterpiece. I leaned my head against the window, watching as the morning sun slowly climbed higher, casting long shadows across the fjord. The tranquility of the moment settled over us like a blanket. We didn't speak much, but the silence between us was filled with something deeper than words.
He glanced at me, his hand brushing mine ever so slightly. "You've always wanted to see Norway like this, haven't you?" His voice was soft, like he was speaking into the beauty of the fjord itself. I smiled, my heart fluttering again at the way he knew me so well. "Yes, but I never imagined it could be this beautiful." His eyes lingered on me for a moment, as if searching for something. Then, with a small smile, he turned back to the road. "You make it better, you know." His words hung in the air, heavier than the mist that still clung to the mountaintops. I swallowed hard, not trusting myself to respond. The beauty of the landscape was nothing compared to the feelings bubbling just beneath the surface between us. Every glance, every word felt like a step toward something inevitable, something we had both been too afraid to admit. The road curved closer to the fjord, and we passed a small weathered wooden cabin perched on a hill overlooking the water. The smell of seaweed and pine drifted through the air, mingling with the distant cry of seabirds. I turned to look at him again, and for the first time, I wondered if he could hear my heart pounding in the stillness of the morning.
We drove through the small town of Sykkylven, where life moved slowly, in rhythm with the gentle flow of the Storfjord. The town was quiet, the streets lined with red and white wooden houses that looked like they had stood there for centuries, witnessing the changing seasons of Norway's untamed beauty. The fjord reflected the surrounding mountains perfectly, as if the earth and sky were holding each other in a quiet embrace. We parked by a small cafe on the waterfront, its walls painted a cheery yellow. Inside, the warmth of the wood stove was inviting, and the rich scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. We sat by the window, watching the stillness of the water, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world.
I sipped my coffee, stealing glances at him over the rim of the cup. He seemed different today, more pensive, his usual teasing smile replaced by something softer, something more vulnerable. "I've been thinking," he began, his fingers tracing the edge of his cup. "About us, about this trip." My heart skipped a beat. I set my cup down, my fingers trembling slightly. "What about it?" He hesitated, his eyes searching mine. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to feel this way." His voice was barely above a whisper, but the weight of his words filled the space between us, making the air feel thicker. I couldn't breathe. It was happening. Everything I had felt, everything I had been too afraid to admit, was right here, in this small cafe, with the Norwegian fjords outside as our witnesses. I've been feeling the same way," I finally managed to say, my voice shaking. He smiled then, that crooked, irresistible smile that always made my heart race. "I was hoping you'd say that."
The road began to climb as we left Sikelven behind, the E39 winding its way up through the mountains. We were heading toward Ålesund, the mountain pass that would take us closer to Ålesund. As we ascended, the landscape grew wilder, more untamed. The pine trees gave way to rocky outcrops, and patches of snow still lingered on the highest peaks, gleaming in the sunlight. The car's engine strained as we climbed higher, but neither of us seemed to notice. The conversation from the cafe hung between us, unspoken but understood. His hand rested on the gearshift, inches from mine, and I could feel the pull to reach out and take it. But I hesitated, unsure of what would happen once I crossed that line.
At the top of the pass, he pulled over, and we stepped out into the brisk mountain air. The view was breathtaking, a vast panorama of valleys and fjords stretching out below us. The sky a perfect, cloudless blue. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant call of a bird soaring high above the peaks. "This is incredible," I breathed, feeling the cool wind whip through my hair. He stood next to me, close enough that our shoulders brushed. "Yeah, it is." We stood there for a long time, side by side, staring out at the endless beauty of the Norwegian wilderness. And then, without saying a word, he reached for my hand. His fingers laced through mine, and suddenly, the world seemed to shift. I looked up at him, my heart racing, and found him already looking at me. "I've wanted to do that for a while," he admitted, his voice low and rough. I smiled, squeezing his hand. "Me too."
The descent into Ålesund was nothing short of magical. The city spread out before us, a beautiful mosaic of islands connected by bridges. Its distinctive Art Nouveau buildings standing proudly against the backdrop of the fjords. The sunlight sparkled on the water, and the sea breeze carried with it the scent of salt and freshly caught fish. We drove across the bridges into the heart of the city, the skyline of colorful buildings and towering mountains creating a contrast that was uniquely Norwegian. Ålesund felt like the perfect place to end our journey, a place where the wild beauty of nature met the charm of human craftsmanship.
We walked hand in hand through the cobblestone streets, exploring the small shops and cafes that lined the harbor. His hand never left mine, and with every step, it felt like we were walking into a new chapter of our lives. The weight of uncertainty had lifted, replaced by a quiet certainty that we were exactly where we were meant to be. In a small square overlooking the water, he stopped and turned to face me, his expression serious but soft. The wind tugged at his hair, and the sunlight danced in his eyes. "I didn't plan any of this," he said, his voice full of emotion. "But being here, with you, it just feels right." I smiled, my heart swelling with happiness. "It does, doesn't it?" And then, under the soft Norwegian sky, with the fjords stretching out before us and the mountains standing tall in the distance, he kissed me. It was a kiss that felt like home, warm, gentle, and full of promise. In that moment, with the beauty of Ålesund surrounding us, I knew that this was the start of something real. Something lasting. This journey, this road trip that had started as two friends exploring Norway, had turned into the beginning of our love story.